Good morning. I'm Nick Pappas, the editorial page editor of the Telegraph, and I'd like to welcome you to the TV studios of Nashua High School South. And for the next 60 minutes, the Telegraph Editorial Board is going to discuss the issues of the day with Rick Santorum, former senator from Pennsylvania and a candidate for President of the United States. Senator, welcome.
Thanks,
to
Nick.
Nashua. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be back.
Kevin Landrigan, our senior political reporter, will ask the first question.
Hey, Senator.
Hi, Kevin.
Let's start with health care. Since you had an exchange over the weekend at a town hall meeting with someone who probably was an Obama campaign supporter, but
I think so.
You made it clear, obviously, you don't believe health care is a fundamental right. What role should the federal government have to make health care more affordable? And are there parts of Obamacare that should be retained, like pre-existing condition bans or providing health care coverage up to age 26?
Yeah, I'd make the argument that in many respects the federal government makes health care less affordable, that when the government gets involved, particularly as they have in as prescriptive a way, mandating certain benefits, providing, in the case of Obamacare and other things, like Medicare, providing a one-size-fits-all insurance policy, insulating the consumer from the purchasing of the product. All of that leads to overutilization, waste, fraud, which we see in the Medicare program, which we see in the private sector insurance market. Again, the whole way that our health insurance structure has been set up was to treat health expenditures different than other types of expenditures. And I discussed this the other night at the town hall meeting, where the federal government doesn't provide subsidies for people to buy food insurance. And there's, food is a necessity. Some would say a fundamental right. I wouldn't say that. I don't think food is a right. I think we have fundamental rights that are in our Declaration of Independence. Economics, certain things and desires of people for even necessities are not rights, but these are things that people make decisions about how to allocate their resources as to what is best for the family, with food and clothing and housing and healthcare and a whole host of other things. What the government has done, though, is pervert the marketplace, and businesses have perverted the marketplace as a result of heavily government subsidies to their health insurance products. And what we've done is created an insurance system that is unlike any other insurance system in the country. Auto insurance. Everybody here, I'm sure, drives a car, and you get auto insurance. Does your auto insurance cover oil changes? Does it cover tire changes? Does it cover routine maintenance on the car? The answer is no, it doesn't. And the reason is insurance is to protect against the accident, the catastrophic effect. Where in health insurance, it doesn't. Health insurance, it covers the oil change, it covers the tire change, it covers the car wash, all of the routine maintenance of you. As like the routine maintenance of a car, it covers. And as a result, imagine if your auto insurance did cover that. And all you had to do is pay a copay. We'd have everybody be driving around in clean cars. Everybody would be driving around nobody would go along without an oil change if it was heavily subsidized to do so. But the opposite is true when it comes to auto insurance today. People are loath to turn in any kind of even fender bender to the insurance company. Why? Because your insurance premiums will go up. Well, in healthcare, it's just the opposite. You want to turn everything into the insurance company, and then you wonder why your insurance premiums go up. That's the problem, is that we have insurance not doing the job of insurance, which is to manage risk. And what you're supposed to do is manage the ordinary course of your own health care, just like you manage the ordinary course of your own care of your car. And we have insurance in place, or should have insurance in place, to provide for the catastrophic event, where then in fact you would need some help because you wouldn't have the financial wherewithal to be able to take care of it. So that's the fundamental shift that has to occur if we're going to see cost under control. If we don't, if we continue to have low deductibles and co-payments that insulate the consumer from the cost of the care, particularly ordinary routine care, then you're going to continue to see overutilization, you're going to continue to see waste, you're going to continue to see emergency room visits. I mean, Romney Care in Massachusetts is a great example. Oh, if we cover more people, we'll have people won't be using emergency rooms, people will more wisely use their care if it's covered. Just the opposite. They actually use more care, that the more people you cover and you provide insurance, they actually use more care and the costs of the system go up. Why? Because you've insulated the consumer from the price. And that's why I've been an advocate for many, many years. Actually, my first year in Congress, I introduced a bill called medical savings accounts, which was a way to change the insurance system in America to one that is focused on insurance again, health insurance, focused on insurance again, which is high deductible policies that provided a mechanism called a medical savings account. Now they're called health savings accounts, where the savings in going from a low deductible policy to a high deductible policy, those savings were captured by the employer, distributed to the employee in the terms of a tax-free distribution into a savings account, and that savings account would come with a debit card, and that debit card could be used to pay for those oil changes and for the car, or in the case of healthcare, the doctor visits, the sprained ankles, the sort of the routine things that happen that are not catastrophic health occurrences.
On taxes, your tax reform is very ambitious, but I guess is it affordable? In other words, with two rates, at 10% and 28%, and you still retain charitable deductions and mortgage interest deductions. Does that raise enough revenue, or would it increase the deficit?
We believe it's, number one, would stimulate growth, and would actually probably, if you had a flat analysis of it, a non-dynamic scoring, it would certainly cost some money. But we believe that that economic growth would be stimulated, and frankly, compared to the other plans that are out there that Republicans have put forward, this is by far the most fiscally responsible one, and targets the very things I think consumers want, taxpayers want, which is simplicity. We eliminate most of the, almost all of the exemptions, deductions, credits, all of those things from the tax code except 5. We keep them those 5 very simple. They'd be different. Those 5 would be different than the 5 existing areas. And when I say areas, charitable deduction, children, pensions, housing, and health care. All of those would not be exactly the same as they are now. We would have a little different way of doing those deductions and exemptions and credits. But those would be the 5 primary areas, and everything else would go away. So you'd have a lower rate, but obviously a broader base, because you'd have a lot less loopholes in the tax code, a lot more simplification. The other area that I've really focused on is the area of manufacturing, which I really believe is a key. Obviously, here in Nashua, that's been and here in the southern tier of New Hampshire, manufacturing is a big deal, and I really believe it's the key to revitalizing American economy, and particularly small-town America's economy. If you look at most small towns in America, they've been hemorrhaging population. Rural areas have been hemorrhaging population, concentrating more in the big city where, quote, the jobs are. And if we want to restore small-town America, we've got to create an opportunity for manufacturing to come back to this country. We went from 21% of the workforce involved in manufacturing down to 9%. And if we want to get that number back up, and I believe we can, then we have to be more competitive. And our competitive disadvantage, contrary to what some believe, or at least have expressed, is not our labor cost. Yes, it is our labor cost, but it's not just our labor cost. If you exclude labor costs from our competitive posture versus our 9 top trading partners, which include, of course, Mexico, China, and a lot of the big trading countries, we are 20% more expensive, excluding labor, than those other 9 countries, which means our taxes are higher, our regulatory burden is higher, our litigation burden, our energy cost of capital, for a variety of different reasons, different ones for different countries, we are cost non-competitive. And so what I've done is focus in on those areas, tried to make us competitive to eliminate that 20% disadvantage, and hopefully then some, so in order to attract businesses back, manufacturing jobs back, particularly ones that are not highly labor intensive. Even China will tell you they're losing jobs, highly labor intensive jobs, particularly along the coastal area of China, to inland China and to Vietnam and to other countries that have even lower wage rates now than China has. So if it's going to be always about wage rates, we're not going to compete. But what we can compete is the vast majority of manufacturing, which is not driven by wage rates, because most manufacturing now is heavily technology related, and so we can get jobs that are higher paying jobs because they are jobs that talk about running computerized equipment and other types of higher technology equipment. So you have an increased wage scale, and you have the ability to be able to manufacture things here. And we eliminate the corporate tax for manufacturers. We eliminate the excise tax for repatriated profits coming from overseas operations back to this country. as long as it's invested in plant and equipment in America. So we provide incentives for money to come back, about $1.5 trillion in money sitting overseas from companies who exported jobs in the past. If they bring that money back, that profit now back, they can do so at no cost if they invested in plant and equipment here in America. Third, I repeal all Obama regulations that are either going in place or have been put in place that are oppressive to the manufacturing and business sector. That number is the CRS, I think it is, that calculates anything over $100 million cost. We would repeal those all, and that's the thing a president can do. He can repeal regulations without congressional approval. Now, to replace them is a longer process, but there's some, for example, the one that I like to talk about that's being put into effect here relatively soon is one on, quote, mercury, which, according to the EPA itself, will probably shut down 60 coal-fired power plants in this country, which will not make electricity cheaper here in this country, which will make it harder for us to be competitive in a manufacturing economy, and will cause, as I said, everybody's power rates, particularly states like New Hampshire, which are heavily dependent upon coal, to go up. I was just up in the North Country, up in Jefferson earlier, and yesterday, and obviously the Northern Pass is a big issue up there, and my response to that is, let's build more power in this country. Let's create more power plants. And the Obama administration is going the opposite direction. They're actually reducing power, and they're going to make that facility probably more urgent if power plants here in New England are shut down and the need for power goes up and power rates continue to go up. There'll be even more pressure for a project like that. So there are interests that we have to balance, and I believe that we need a pro-energy policy that phases out all the subsidies to oil, gas, nuclear. Well, there aren't any to nuclear, but oil, gas, wind, solar, ethanol, all of them should be phased out. We should have a free market of energy. We should have exploration in this country, offshore, ANWR. We're doing it in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, we've seen the Marcellus Shale reduce natural gas prices in this country from what was a high of about $12 less than 10 years ago to $3.60. That's the equivalent of $100 oil going down to $30. All because we now have a plentiful domestic supply of natural gas in this country. We can reduce prices of energy by producing it here, by building pipelines, what the administration is against, by opening up oil fields in North Dakota and Alaska and other places, and get cheaper energy, allow for more economic growth, and allow for consumers to have more money in their pockets, because they're not sending it to Saudi Arabia, they're keeping it here at home.
But are there any areas, either offshore or in country, that should be off limits to?
Well, of course. I mean, I'm sure there are areas that may be environmentally sensitive that we wouldn't want to do exploration. But ANWR isn't one of them. Yep. ANWR is a tundra that has very little vegetation and even less animal life. It has been portrayed. I remember getting these brochures when I was in the Senate from the Sierra Club, and they talk about ANWR, and you'd see these pristine, beautiful mountains and lakes and all these things, as if we were going to be drilling in the mountainous regions of Alaska. It's the Arctic coastal plain. I mean, it's flat. It's got very little vegetation on it, very little animal habitat. The disruption to that coastal plain would be de minimis, in that they're not even going to be building permanent roads. In fact, the roads that they will build in order to do the drilling are ice roads, because that area is frozen over 10 months out of the year. They can build ice roads. You guys know all about that up here. I mean, you drive on Lake Winnipesaukee in the middle of the winter, right? Well, you're going to drive on out across this tundra, build ice roads, and construct your facilities. And before it freezes, before it thaws, you take your equipment off. You've created no permanent damage. You've created no marks at all, other than the actual drilling platform.
The super committee was unable to reach a consensus on cuts and perhaps revenues, which are going to trigger a number of other types of cuts. How do you feel about the drastic nature of those reductions that could be the result of that?
Well, I'm principally concerned about the drastic nature of the national security, the defense reductions. I think you've seen even Leon Panetta come out and say this would be devastating to our military readiness, and that's one of the reasons I thought the whole concept of this super committee and these these fallback cuts was a bad idea. If the Congress and the President couldn't provide leadership, some idea that without the President, and clearly the President was completely missing in action on this entire exercise, without the President, that 6 people appointed by each party would somehow or another be the holders of wisdom to be able to make a deal on this was folly from the beginning. The other folly is that none of these cuts take place until after the election, which gives President Obama pretty much what he wanted, which was if you think about it, he's the big winner here in what he actually said he wanted, which is no cuts before the election and a debt ceiling extension until after the election. And so he's accomplished what he wanted by being an absentee leader on very important issues. The problem is it's not what the economy needed. It's not what our financial markets needed, and it could have serious consequences for this country if, in fact, these cuts are, well, they're going to have serious consequences now from the standpoint of financial markets. It's going to have consequences in the long term if, in fact, these defense cuts go in place. Having said that, I intend to be the president, so we're going to make sure that we put together a very aggressive package of reducing this deficit, and that's going to replace whatever program, there are sequesters that are in place for the defense budget. We'll address that issue. One of the first things we'll do when we come into office is have a very robust package of deficit reduction that will replace these draconian cuts in the Defense Department, and then some, by the way.
But what does it say to you that they were unable to reach an agreement on something so important?
It's lack of leadership. And that's what the bottom line comes down to. That. I mean, Harry Truman's old song that the buck stops here. The President of the United States is the leader of the country, and the President of the United States did virtually nothing to encourage and to facilitate any kind of deal there. He ran around the country preaching class warfare and taxing the rich. He went around and campaigned as we see in key swing states on taxpayer dollars to try to pass a tax increase instead of doing the hard work of working with the relevant parties and trying to craft a deal that was going to move the country in the right direction. And you get what you invest your money in or your time in.
But doesn't that let Congress off the hook a little bit, and in particular the 12 members of the committee? I mean, these are people who had a combined 190 years of time in Washington, either as House members or members of the Senate. The agreement that was reached between the president and the leaders of both parties was that this was going to be their responsibility to sit down and work something out. Don't they bear some of the responsibility for this?
Oh, sure, they bear some of the responsibility, but ultimately, I believe the responsibility lays at the man who helped orchestrate this deal and put this thing together. And very little evidence that the president at all participated in this process and tried to move the ball in a way that could get the kind of bipartisan support that was necessary. He played politics with this. He played class warfare politics throughout the course of this super committee negotiations, and if anything, made it harder for them. He poisoned the well and made it harder for them to reach some sort of accord.
But you had some experiences working in a bipartisan way when you were in the Senate on welfare reform, on religious freedom, on a number of issues. Why does that not exist today? This ability to work with both sides?
Well, a couple of reasons. First, I would just argue that we have a president who is as partisan and as divisive as any president we've ever seen. When I was in the United States Senate, I used to complain to George Bush because Bush would never go out and criticize the Democrats in the United States Senate for obstructing things. He would blame the Senate, but he would never say, go after it, say, well, it was Harry Reid or this and that. Never do that. And I'd say, why don't you do that? You're blaming me. He said, well, you're not getting your job. I said, it's not me, it's him. It's these guys that are blocking. He says, I'm the president. I'm not going to go and play these. I'm not going to play this kind of politics. The president not only does he name Republicans, he names them by name and goes after them individually. It's something that we haven't seen in a long time in Washington D.C. and I think it's below the dignity of the president of the United States. He's a leader. He's not the head of the Democratic National Committee. And that's the way he's acting. He's acting like a politician running for office instead of a president governing. And I really do believe that has had a poisonous impact. The worst thing that happened for this country in many ways was the Democrats to get that 60th vote in the United States Senate, because the president, his initial few months in office, had the ability to basically ram down anything the Democrats wanted and sought and really had no desire other than for political cover to find one Republican. He had no desire to find any kind of real compromise in trying to pass anything in Washington, and he was able to get things done with a strong partisan hand. And he's never been able to change from that. He feels like his mission is to regain that advantage so he can continue to do that. And he hasn't recognized that the country has rejected his policies, and I think is increasingly rejecting his tactics and trying to move his agenda forward. So I think that's a big thing. The second thing is, and we experienced this clearly when I was in the United States Senate, and certainly the longer I was there, the more we saw this, which is, for a long time in Washington, D.C., there was this general expectation that Washington was going to continue to get bigger and do more things, and the Republicans' job was just to do less. But that the inexorable move of government was to get bigger and to involve itself in more things. And Republicans always were able to compromise. If you go back and look, I mean, compromises were always doing less of what the Democrats wanted to do, or do it cheaper. But as far as fundamentally shrinking the size of government, there are very few instances of that. One was, as you mentioned, welfare reform. That was right after a big election victory of Republicans that I think shocked the Democrats, shocked them after 40 years of being in charge of Congress and having that inexorable growth of government continue. This really knocked them off their game, and in particular, thankfully, knocked Bill Clinton off his game to the point where he felt like he had to compromise in actually doing something to shrink the size of government. As you know, right after the election, he signed it right before the election. Right after the election, he said he would repeal it, that it was a mistake, and that he wanted. And of course, Obama and Pelosi have subsequently tried to reinvest more money in the welfare system. But as far as any real reversal in the size of government, Republicans have always been the guardian to try to slow it down, but never to reverse it. And so now you have a group of Republicans who are in office who are saying, no, stop, enough. We want to go in a different direction. And all of a sudden, you're not being good sports anymore. You're not compromising with us anymore. How dare you not compromise with us in doing more government and just doing a little less more? Now you want to actually shrink government? Well, we're not going to. We've never done that. We haven't done that in 80 years in Washington. How dare you ask us to shrink government? And for them to compromise on doing so, well, no, it's the Republicans' fault. They're not compromising. We've been compromising for a long, long, long time, and we now have a $3.6 trillion government. We're consuming 25% of GDP, which is an historic high. And the idea that Republicans have to, quote, compromise by increasing taxes to feed this beast, when this beast is consuming 7% more than what the average federal government has consumed over the past 50, almost 60 years now, is a non-starter for conservatives now. We've sort of said enough, and that now we're uncompromising. I think we need to look back and say, well, where have all these compromises gotten us? And how about compromising and doing something in the direction of smaller government instead of us compromising in the direction of of not quite as fast growing bigger government?
Legal immigration obviously has become a key issue in this race, particularly given former House Speaker Newt Gingrich's comments last week. Do you view those comments as endorsing amnesty, and what do you do with people who've been here for decades who actually have jobs, are contributing to society? I wasn't aware in the past you were in favor of deporting those people either.
Well, my position has never been that we should be, raiding homes and searching and trying to find every illegal immigrant to this country. But my position has been that they should not be able to hold employment in this country. That's the law in this country. It should be enforced. And so you say, well, people have been holding jobs responsibly for 20 years. Well, they're holding jobs illegally in this country, and they shouldn't be. That we should be enforcing the law, as well as allowing both the federal and state government to be able to, as people are found, whether it's through criminal activity or the like, they should go through the process of deportation if they're found to be in this country illegally. But I haven't supported that we need to have some national effort to go out and spend a huge amounts of money to try to find every person who's here illegally. But if you dry up employment opportunities, as you've seen, at least from some of the reports that I've seen, we've seen a decrease in the number of illegal immigrants in this country. Some suggest as much as 2 to 3 million have returned. And now I know some of those are to Mexico, but a lot of them are people who are here on overstays, who were here working and went home because those jobs are no longer available. So I think it does show that if jobs dry up, people do leave. And if we actually enforce the law, more people would leave. The principal thing that we need to accomplish first, though, is to secure the border. And I think amnesty, and do I believe what Newt suggested is amnesty? Well, even he said after the debate the other night that millions of people would be able to stay in this country as a result of his proposal. I don't know what you call amnesty. Does amnesty only mean full citizenship, or does it mean that you are forgiven for your transgressions and are allowed to stay here under some status? If that's amnesty, then clearly that's what Newt's suggesting.
And what about Mitt Romney? As we've seen in the last couple of days, he made some comments during the 2008 campaign that seemed to suggest that he would support a path to citizenship for some of these longer.
Well, this is just another Romneyism of being in one place when the issue is whether he's running in Massachusetts or he has taken a more moderate position or more liberal position on the issue, and now as he's running for the Republican Party nomination in a conservative Republican primary, he has transformed himself into a much more ardent conservative. And one of the things I pitch myself as here in New Hampshire and across the country is if you're looking for someone who's had a pretty solid, consistent record on this, I've never voted for any benefits for illegal immigrants in this country. My father is a legal immigrant to this country. I've actually voted against benefits for legal immigrants to this country. Most legal immigrants who come into this country sign a piece of paper, and they're sponsored immigrants. And they sign a piece of paper saying they won't become a ward of the state. And if they did, that they'll go home. That law is not enforced. And yet we provide benefits to legal immigrants here in this country, welfare benefits, that, in my opinion, when my father came to this country, my grandfather came to this country, they didn't get any benefits. They got the benefit of being an American. They got the opportunity to live here in America, to be able to pursue your dreams, to practice your faith, to do things that were vitally important for them, and they were willing to make sacrifices to do so. And I would just make the argument that that is the way it should be for people who come to this country. They come here not to become wards of the state, not to get federal benefits. And I believe that the vast majority of people who come to this country don't come here for those reasons. They may fall on hard times. Well, the deal was you're not going to receive benefits. The deal was you come here and you make your way.
We have a question from someone who's watching this online, and they're asking that what your plan is for helping American veterans who are currently unemployed after returning home, considering that the unemployment rate for veterans is now at about 14%.
Yeah, it's a huge problem of our returning vets, and as you know, one of the big reasons for unemployment is because of a lot of health problems subsequent to returning, PTSD, and you see suicide rates are, I think it's, I knew the number, it was like 18 a week or 18 a month or something like that, but some horribly unacceptable number of the trauma. And this goes back to the larger question of the operational tempo of our military right now and what we're doing to stress men and women in uniform, particularly our National Guards and Reserve, who are under constant redeployment. 4, 5, 6. I've talked to people with 7 deployments over the past 8 or 9 years, and the tremendous mental as well physical, but particularly mental damage that is being done and being in a war zone repeatedly, being away from your family in the case of reservists and guardsmen. So this is a huge public health problem for our veterans that bleeds over into the problem of homelessness, suicide, mental disorders, as well as then unemployment, because all of those things tend to lead to higher rates of unemployment because of the maladies that our veterans are dealing with. One of the things I've been very, very clear about is that this has to be a real focus. That number one, we got to stop. We got to stop this problem from happening. And the way you do that, I'm one of the. I think maybe the only person in the race that says we actually need to increase the number of people, men and women in uniform. That's why I'm against any kind of top-line cut in defense. It doesn't mean that we can't and we shouldn't and we will scrub the Defense Department budget. I was on the Armed Services Committee for 8 years. I know there's a lot of waste. There's a lot of programs that are there that are still antiquated programs that we don't need to be funding. There's a lot of waste in the way that we contract. There's a lot of waste in the way that we privatize some of these services and have subcontractors who do this for the Defense Department. I think you've heard us talk about this program called Strong America Now, and this program called Lean Six Sigma, of trying to provide business principles and inject that into the Defense Department. I would, with both hands, come and do that to try to save money within the Defense Department, streamline the Defense Department, and plow at least a big chunk of that money back into upgrading, not upgrading, but expanding our fighting forces. So we're not stressing the men and women who are the volunteers force. We're not stressing these folks with multiple deployments and the consequential damage that occurs as a result of that. So that would be number one. Number two, obviously making sure that we're providing the best medical care possible for these veterans. And there's a lot of concern because the Obama administration has come out with now cuts in TRICARE and cuts in other types of veterans benefit programs. This is the wrong time, in my opinion, to be talking about cuts in these programs. I understand we need to tighten our belt, and I'm for tightening our belt. I just think this, when it comes to national security and those who have served our country and those who have sacrificed for our country, not to say there can't ever be any changes, but that shouldn't be the first place or even one of the places right now we should be looking. If it's a matter of efficiency, that's one thing. If it's a matter of reducing benefits to save money, I think that's a very bad idea right now.
Let's carry that a step further and talk about what you see as the role of the American military moving forward. A lot of discussion about how Afghanistan, Iraq, that's the past. More in the future, we'll be looking as our role was in Libya. Just talk a little bit about, when you take a look at the challenges that are facing the country, how do we advance our foreign policy interests in the world in terms of our military?
Well, I would say that Libya was fundamentally different because I don't believe we had a national security interest in being in Libya. It seemed to me fairly clear, relatively short period of time into this conflict, that the insurgents were not necessarily going to be our best friends. It wasn't clear to me at the beginning because I didn't have any kind of intelligence as to what it was, and so I was like everybody else, wondering, what should we do here? Should we jump on these folks' side or shouldn't we? And the more that I was able to find out over the course of the first few weeks, it seemed clear to me that we didn't have a national security interest in this fight. The reason the president got involved seemed to be fairly clear, that we were. The French were pushing us, the Arab League was pushing us, and ultimately we acceded to the United Nations request to come in and assist, and then we quickly pulled out. Said, we'll do a little, and then we don't want to do any more. And the president called this leading from behind. America should not lead from behind in that sense. I mean, leading from behind, at least as it was meant by the person who coined the phrase, was to actually lead from up front, but to give credit to everybody else so it looks like you're behind. So it doesn't look like you're the person that's actually calling the shots, but that you share credit with everybody, and you have, it's the old idea, success has a lot of partners. This was a situation where, again, we had no national security interest that I could determine, and we certainly had at no point in time felt like it was a necessity for America to come in and use ground troops to remove this regime. The whole point of our military action was humanitarian in nature. If you go back to it, it was to stop a massacre from occurring in I think it was Benghazi. So here you have a very different thing than Afghanistan, which was a training ground and breeding ground for the folks who attacked us, and Iraq, who was a potential threat to the region because of a variety of different reasons, terrorism, weapons, etc. Those were decisions where we made that it wasn't our national security interest to change that government. And in the future, if that is the case, I would agree that we need to learn from both of these experiences. And if you go back to Afghanistan, I believe there were less than 1,000 troops in Afghanistan, American troops, when the Taliban was thrown out. I think there were just a few hundred troops, and they were strategic in the sense of helping the Afghans execute their mission. And we used air cover and other things to be able to execute that. That was a great model, and it's a great model if it can be used. It can't always be used, but if you can use it, you saw one that was very successful. The problem with that is you don't have, at the time, as you know, we didn't have a lot of military presence, and so what happens afterwards becomes a little bit more problematic, as we've seen in Afghanistan. We've seen Iraq, we had a heavy presence there, but because of our heavy presence, we could actually manage the transition a lot better than the light presence we had in Afghanistan, where it was much more difficult to manage. So again, going back and learning lessons, I can honestly say that I haven't spent an enormous amount of time learning those lessons. I've just done a little reading, but certainly as president, I'll do a lot more reading and a lot better understanding before we make any commitments, and how those worked and what were the pluses and minuses of doing it each way. The next big issue, I believe, is Iran, and how do we handle that situation? I've been very clear about the fact that under a Santorum presidency, if it hasn't occurred already, there will be no nuclear Iran, and that we will take whatever steps are necessary to make sure that that doesn't happen. And the reason I say that is not because I'm Robert Conrad and say you want to knock the battery off my shoulder. I don't want to be the toughest guy on the block. It's just that Iran with a nuclear weapon is, in my opinion, the equivalent of Al Qaeda with a nuclear weapon. And I don't think anybody in America would stand for Al Qaeda having a nuclear weapon. But Iran is every bit as radical Islamic regime as Al Qaeda is, only of the Shiite variety instead of the Sunni variety. And instead of having a terrorist organization, it's a terrorist organization that's running the country of Iran and has huge resources and a large military and to be able to project power in the region and throughout the world. And so it's worse in many respects than having Al Qaeda, because not only would this nation state have it, but they can make that available to other not regimes, but potentially rogue regimes, but certainly rogue terrorist organizations that could harm not just the state of Israel, but countries beyond it. So I've been very clear about increased sanctions directly on the Bank of Iran to make sure that they cannot sell their oil in the world market. That doesn't mean they won't be able to sell their oil. I understand that. The Chinese will buy their oil. But the Chinese are good business people. They're not going to pay the fair market value for that oil. If they're the only customer, my guess is they're going to get a very deep discount on that Iranian oil. So it will hurt them. It won't completely shut them off, but it will hurt their country dramatically. We need to do things to help the Iranian revolution, if you will, that percolated a couple of years ago. We need to give them the opportunity to reinvigorate and to coalesce again. That's something that I was a very strong supporter of and leader when I was in the United States Senate. I authored a bill called the Iran Freedom Support Act. Well, at the time I introduced it, I got 0 co-sponsor because it called for funding pro-democracy groups, overturning the regime, and stopping the nuclear program. I was told in briefings by the intelligence community there was no opposition movement, it didn't exist, and that there was no nuclear program, that had been shut down. Both turned out to be false, and my bill within less than 2 years period of time, even though it was originally opposed, actually for quite some time, by George Bush, and was opposed on the floor of the Senate by none other than Joe Biden. We went to battle on this issue, and he actually beat me. We actually lost the vote by 3 votes, and then 4 months later it passed unanimously. Once it was clear what Iran was doing with their nuclear program and IEDs and a whole host of other things. So we put a bill in place that was going to do that, was going to impose sanctions and was going to help the pro-democracy movement. While some sanctions were imposed, no money was really ever sent to Iran to help the pro-democracy movement. And when the Green Revolution came about in 2009, we were in no position to help them. And in fact, we did worse than that. We didn't support them at all under President Obama. We took a neutral position at best. And some would even suggest that neutrality obviously benefited the regime a lot more than those who were out in the streets. So those 2 things absolutely need to be done. Third is we need to use covert activity, including computer viruses. We've seen Israeli computer viruses that have been effective in slowing down some of this weapons program. There have been other things that have happened. Scientists have turned up accidentally dead. And we need to be very clear. One of the things I've said is that if you are a foreign scientist going into Iran to work on their nuclear program, you are an enemy combatant of the United States, and you'll be treated just like any other terrorist who's trying to attack the United States, because fundamentally that's what they're trying to do. And then finally, we need to be very clear in working with the Israelis, I would say openly with the Israelis, about some sort of strike to take out that and degrade that nuclear capability. I don't want to use that. I hope we don't have to use that, but we have to clearly say that we will use that and that we are planning to use that unless they open up their facilities, allow inspectors, and begin to tear down that facility. And if they don't, then we will have to degrade it for them.
We have another question asking about trade, saying that you had voted for NAFTA.
I voted against NAFTA.
Okay, this one's saying, oh yes, you voted against NAFTA.
Yeah.
But the
I was in the House at the time, yeah.
And the Republican consensus is that free trade is a net plus, both economically and in terms of spreading Western values. Could you just give us a rundown of your trade philosophy?
Yeah, I generally agree with that philosophy, but I'm not for any trade deal that anybody negotiates. I was against NAFTA, which was, I think, originally negotiated by George H.W. Bush and then subsequently by Bill Clinton, but it was a joint effort between two administrations. First off, I represented the Steel Valley of Pittsburgh, so I had every steel mill in the city of Pittsburgh that was in my district. I had a 71% Democratic district. A lot of my district was unemployed because a lot of those jobs did move to Mexico, and it was certainly, representing that district, even though I was a pretty strong conservative. I felt. I saw the damage that trade did to our region of the country, A, and B, I was greatly concerned about Mexico as a trading partner, and whether a deal the size of this deal was in the best interest of the United States economy, and given what I consider to be the unreliability of the Mexican economy and the Mexican government. And if you recall, right after the deal was put in place, they greatly devalued the peso and made the deal pretty lopsided for a long time under NAFTA. I had some concerns about that. I expressed them. I said it was a hard decision for me, but I did vote no. In some respects, in reflection of my district. In some respects, because of the concerns I had. But I think I don't know if I voted against any other trade deals. I think most of the ones I have supported. I've supported them for generally two reasons, not just for the economic impact of lowering tariff barriers, which I generally believe is good, but a lot of the deals I supported because of the geopolitical impact. For example, I was one of the most zealous supporters of the Colombian Free Trade Agreement, which President Obama put on ice for almost 3 years. And for political purposes, purely domestic political purposes, labor and environmental groups, while we hung the people of Colombia who were at our shoulder trying to fight narco-terrorists and radical socialists, militant socialists like Hugo Chavez and Evo Morales and the like in South America. Here's Colombia standing strong, shoulder to shoulder with the United States, taking the grief, and we played politics with them. I just think that's reprehensible. One of the things I said at the most recent debate is that we need someone who understands how important Central and South America are, not just to our economic health, but to our national security, and that we need to develop much closer and stronger ties with Latin America and with South America, and we've lost a lot. We've seen a lot of countries go to seed over the last, and I wish I could just say it was President Obama. It was not. It was President Bush and President Obama. You can make the argument that we had our attention drawn other places, but hopefully presidents can walk and chew gum, and President Bush didn't. President Bush did not pay the attention, did not make visits, did not develop relationships with that area of the world, and we've seen a growth of militant socialism. We've seen a degrading of our relationships, of our economic ties in that region. We've seen China become much more of a force in that region, all of which to the detriment of our economy and to our security.
Senator, what should the role of the federal government be in education?
Extremely limited. One of the areas that I freely admit a mistake was voting for No Child Left Behind. I blame it in some respects to the frustration of trying to get reform done and being thwarted by the idea that, well, we really don't know that our kids aren't doing well. These tests are all different around the country, and you can't compare apples to oranges. And so at the time, there was a siren's call to have some sort of national testing so we could have a better evaluation of how we were doing as a country. And I was lured by that, in spite of what I saw with real problems of increased federal aid to education and as a result, federal aid to education increasing, of course, federal control of education increased when the money goes up. And when I came to the United States Senate, I think the number was 3%, which is how much the federal government's share of the overall primary and secondary education budget. It's now close to 11%. We've seen no discernible improvement in the quality of education. And so I made a bad deal in signing up on that, and I made a bad deal in another way. And it's something I didn't. One of the things of getting out of Washington and being away from it a while, you get a little different perspective. And Karen and I have 7 children. We homeschool our kids, not in just through grade school, but we do homeschool our kids, and we sort of have a perspective on the education system. It's a little different than others. And one of the things that I knew at the time, but I didn't really penetrate me, if you will, was that measuring academics only measures a very small part of a child's education, right? I mean, how many parents, when it comes to the growth of your children, comes to to forming your children throughout their lives, throughout their formative years, only care about their academic performance? Very few. I haven't found one yet who only cares about their academic performance. They care about character, they care about virtue development, they care about good manners, they care about spiritual development, they care about all these different things that make a well-rounded child. So it's like when you hire somebody to work at the newspaper. I'm sure you don't run and say, what's their GPA, right? You look at a lot of things. You interview them. Why? You want to see are they hard workers? Can they communicate well? Are they respectful? All of these things that are important to be a good citizen and a contributor to society. And yet, our academic institutions, as a result of partly part of the federal government, focuses on this very narrow area about doing well on a test. And I think we suffer as a result of that. So I would have done it differently. Secondly, I think Republicans are a little timid about how fundamental a change we need to the education system in this country. The education system in this country is set up pretty much it was set up at the time that Henry Ford was building the Model T. And we were coming off the farms and into the cities and into the factories, and so we had to create a factory for educating those children who were in the whose parents were in the factory now. So we created factory schools. We created these institutions, and just like the Model T, we had people in, and we produced a car, one color, and here's what it was. Everybody got the same, and if you liked it, you could buy it. If you didn't like it, well, you don't buy it. If you couldn't afford it, well, that's what we did with education. Education in America today is about educating children. It's not about educating your child. It's not about customizing. It's giving you, an SUV with a sunroof and all these. You now, as a customer, expect to have a product that meets what you want. That is not how the education system in this country is designed. It's designed to educate children, and if your child happens to do well and survive in that, great. If they don't, not so good. And what the problem is, it's not so good for way too many kids. And also the president's, and a lot of our academic institutions, primary and secondary schools, are focused on this idea that children need to go to college. It's great if children go to college, but the idea of the president said that every child should go to college, that's absurd. Everybody doesn't need to go to college. There are lots of great employment opportunities in a lot of other areas that don't require a college education. But we're not setting up a system for those children to have the opportunities to be able to maximize their potential, which may not be an academic potential, but it may be a manual or a combination of those. We need an education system that is focused on providing the customer of the education system what they need. And the customer of the education system, contrary to what some would believe, I believe, is the parents. Why? Number one, they pay for it. So the customer usually pays for it. And number two, it's the parents' responsibility to educate their children, not the schools. And so the school is supposed to be here to help parents do their job. And in fact, the really good schools do that. but most schools don't. And we don't even ask them or require them to do so. So what we need to do is a fundamental shift in the way we look at education in this country and focus it around how do we engage parents in the process of designing an educational experience for each child in America. And so to maximize that child's potential, whatever that is. People say, well, we don't have the resources to do it. Well, we have the resources to do a bad job. Let's see if we can find some, let's get the proper resources, and maybe we need more. I'm okay to that. If we're ending up, instead of 50% of or 60 or 70% of kids in some schools in America dropping out, if we're ending up with those kids becoming productive members of society with character and virtue and all the things that are necessary to be good citizens, it's worth the money. But pumping money into a system that is producing large amount of failure is not the answer.
Now, during that debate on No Child Left Behind, you were a leader with regards to teaching intelligent design. There was kind of an evolution, if you'll pardon the pun, on that position. What do you think science classes should teach the controversy, as it's now called?
Yeah, well, again, I wasn't advocating teaching of any particular curriculum. What I was advocating was an intellectual debate in the classroom that most children would love to have, which is, where do we come from? Who are we? And in most classrooms in America, they don't have that debate. They're taught a fact, a scientific fact, which is certainly supportable by a lot of evidence, but isn't supportable by all the evidence. And I think it's important that we understand that there are other ideas out there as to how man came to be that are scientific in nature, that raise questions about whether the theory of evolution is in fact capable of answering all the questions about how we got to where we are today. And I think that debate and discussion would be a very robust and healthy thing in our classroom. There are many on the left and in the scientific community, so to speak, who are afraid of that discussion because, oh my goodness, you might mention the word, God forbid, God in the classroom, or creator. That there may be some things that are inexplainable by nature where there may be, where it's actually better explained by a creator. And of course, we can't have that discussion. It's very interesting that you have a situation where science will only allow things in the classroom that are consistent with a non-creator idea of how we got here, as if somehow or another that's scientific. Well, maybe the science points to the fact that maybe science doesn't explain all these things. And if it does point to that, then why don't we pursue that? But you can't, because it's not science. Well, but if science is pointing you there, then how do you say it's not science? It's worth a debate. And it's one of the things that frustrates me a lot about education in general, which is it's devoid of any kind of morality or spirituality or history of Western civilization being based in Christianity or the Bible. All of those things are relevant for a well-rounded child to know about the world they live in, which is a world that is founded on Judeo-Christian principles and on Western civilization, which of course is founded on the Bible. All of these things tend to be sanitized in the public square and in many cases in public schools, and it's not to the benefit of a proper, well-rounded education. We should have the confidence to be able to teach what is historically accurate with respect to who we are and where we come from, both from the standpoint of sociology as well as the standpoint of science.
I wanted to talk quickly about entitlement reform. Social Security, you've supported in the past a form of private investment accounts. Detail how that would work, what kind of workers that would affect, and how would you approach this differently than President Bush did, who obviously took several swings on Capitol Hill and didn't get anywhere.
He took swings and I got hit. 2005, he went out and said we were going to reform Social Security, and I was like one of the Rough Riders following Teddy Roosevelt up the hill. In this case, I got a bullet in my head. So, I fought the Social Security battles. Jim DeMint and I'll never forget, we were on the floor of the United States Senate debating. It was Dick Durbin and Ron Wyden, I think, were the two. We had actually a formal structured debate. And they never had, to my knowledge, never had one where they actually, we had time divided, and it was like almost like a high school debate, which we had on the floor of the Senate, talking about Social Security. And one of the things I did advocate back then was the idea of trying to do personal retirement accounts. And the reason I did so was because at the time, we were running a surplus in the Social Security system. And so the idea was, let's take the surplus, which for, well, since 1983 when it passed, which was being used to hide the federal budget deficit, was being spent by the federal government. There's no surplus in Social Security. It was just bonds of the government owing the government money, which is no ability, does not increase the government's ability to pay that back. And so we were using this surplus to pay for other areas of government. And I said, well, let's stop doing that, and let's create an asset that's outside the government, where people have to pay the government, so it's a real asset instead of a promise of the government to pay. And that's why I suggested that we set up small personal accounts and try to grow them over time. And in the meantime, try to control the budget deficit so we could afford to continue to do this without running deficits. Well, that sort of went out the window in the last 3 years. We've now seen an explosion of the federal budget. We've seen an explosion of the deficit, and now we're running a deficit in Social Security. So sort of all things came to a head. And I hear, and I haven't read the details of some of these plans that folks, I know Newt has a plan to, have personal accounts for everybody. I'd like to know where he gets the money from. The only way you can do it, right now we don't have enough money coming in to pay for the benefits. And so if you want to take, as he suggested, take that 12.4% of contribution that's being made by workers, younger workers, and take that out of the Social Security Trust Fund and create a personal account for somebody, well, then where are we going to get the money to pay the benefits? The only way you can do that is to increase the deficit even more. I just don't think this is the time when we can afford to see even more deficits to fund a program that's not going to really have any impact on the deficit for 40 years or 30 years. I just don't think we're in that position. I think we need to get our house in order, get our deficits down, hopefully start running surpluses, and be in a position where we can then try a program like this. But I think right now we're in criticality mode, and we've got to figure out a way to have revenues match expenditures, and at least in the short term. And I was afraid of this. I was warning for this the entire time. I said, if we don't do something now, we're going to miss our opportunity to fix this system and transition it. And in my opinion, we've missed our window. And now we've got to fix it in a way that is consistent, unfortunately, with a system that is not a particularly generous system to future retirees, but it's a system we got stuck with under Roosevelt.
Senator, we're pretty much at time. We have like maybe 30 seconds left. Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you would like to leave with us briefly today?
Well, first off, I appreciate the opportunity for being here, and I thank you for your questions. I would just say that what I think I bring to the table is experience, accomplishments, vision, and the courage and the character to get this done in Washington, D.C., and the ability to hopefully communicate with the American public to get that done. And if people here in New Hampshire like what they heard, or I guess you're on the web, so I guess anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world that's watching, I'd appreciate you go to ricksantorum.com and help us out. We could use your help and support. We're running a grassroots campaign for president, one about ideas, one about vision, and a record to back up that vision. As the other day someone mentioned to me on a radio show, they said, you talk too much about your record. You should talk more about what you want to do. So the other candidates just talk about what they want to do. And my answer was, well, if I had their record, that's all I'd talk about too. But I have a good record. I've got a record that actually supports the things that I do want to accomplish, and hopefully the people of New Hampshire will figure that out, and come January 10th, we'll have a very good day.
Thank you, Senator. That brings to a close today's Telegraph Editorial Board session with Senator Santorum. We'd like to thank the Senator for joining us today. As always, we'd like to thank the staff and the students and the faculty at Nashua High School for making this possible. Please check back in the coming days to NashuaTelegraph.com for further information on upcoming sessions with other candidates. Until then, thank you and have a good day.
Thank you. Yeah, just stay sitting.